بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. To proceed, inshallah, today we'll go over Arkanu Salah wa Wajibatuha. That's the pillars of the prayers and their mandatory acts, and there are 12 pillars and 7 mandatory acts according to al-Umdat. In the Hanbali madhab and other books you'll find 14 and 8, but sometimes it's just because of the division, and sometimes there are minor differences. But at any rate, in al-Umdat, 12 pillars and 7 mandatory acts. And then he will define the pillars and define the mandatory acts and everything. And I just wanted to mention to you about the statement of الناس يعبدون الله, the people worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the claimants of Sufism, not the Sufis, but the claimants of Sufism worship themselves, about the regular folk, the common folk, the people, the ordinary people, and how many of them. It depends on ilm, and it's also, so the ulama and al-arifun and all of this, the common folk can actually exceed them in faith. Some of the common folk can exceed them in faith and can come ahead of them in the hereafter by their devotion and sincerity. They know very less, they know very little. And they never heard of all of this stuff. They never heard of stations, the word maqam or the word hal, but they do it. They just do it. They didn't hear of it. They didn't learn it. They just do it. And that is the ultimate goal, is for us to actually do it. All of this exposure, all of this knowledge can make us insolent and arrogant. So when we talk about, seeing your spouse as like a glass board and seeing beyond and through and so on and so forth, and you try to practice it, and you go home and your spouse starts to argue with you, and you say, to them, be neutral here. So you say to them, or you ignore them. You ignore their basically just loud sort of commotion, and then you see beyond them. Keep in mind, you could be the most arrogant, filthy person in the whole world. You're trying to exercise Sufism here, but you exercise it from a point of arrogance. Because you're arrogant, and all you earned, all you gained, is the information that someone said, see through them, they're think of them as a glass board, Allah is the one who decreed this for you. So you're basically trying to exercise this from a point of arrogance. It doesn't work. It will not make you have fana al-shuhud. It is when your heart truly sees Allah beyond all these things or all of these events, and you see through the events. Keep this in mind. Uwais ibn Amir al-Qurani was able to exceed, the greats, the luminaries of al-Tabi'een. Who did the Prophet say to Umar or Abu Bakr, if you see Zuhri or Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib or Sa'id ibn Jubayr, or Ata or this or that, the greatest of the Tabi'een, the luminaries of the Tabi'een, did he say to Umar, when you see them, ask them to make dua for you? He did not. He told Umar, when you see Uwais ibn Amir al-Qurani, unknown fellow from deep in the valleys of Yemen, unknown shepherd in the valleys of Yemen, not known to anyone, not distinguished in any discipline of knowledge. And the Prophet ﷺ said to Umar, if you see him, you Umar, had there been a prophet after me, it would have been Umar. Umar al-Muhaddis, the inspired. If you see Uwais, ask him to pray for you. And Uwais earned this status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and deserved to be mentioned by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to a Sahabi in this way, because he's one of the common folk, the ordinary folk. So at the end of the day, it's about the work of the heart it's not about even the knowledge of the heart. It is about the work of the heart. Would your heart actually do this or not? That is what matters. Arkan as-salah wa wajibatuha, the pillars of the prayers and the mandatory acts. The pillars are 12, the mandatory acts are 7. And the most important here that is not mentioned, because this is fiqh, this is the quantifiable rulings. The most important here is devotion and your sincerity and your khushu' and so on and so forth. But we're talking here about the quantifiable rules and laws, and these are important. It is basically the outer shell that protects the work of the heart inside. The outer shell has to also be fixed and has to also be compliant. So standing, takbir, Fatiha, bowing, rising from bowing, prostration, sitting between the prostrations, tranquility, which is to have, to not make haste, last tashahhud, sitting during the last tashahhud and the first taslim. These are the 12 pillars of the prayer. So he started by saying the pillars are 12, but he did not identify for us what the pillars are versus the mandatory actions versus the sunan. So it may be helpful to begin by this distinction between pillars, mandatory actions, and sunan. So what is the difference between pillars and mandatory actions? In the Hanbali madhab, we will not go into detailed comparative fiqh today because it would be so complicated, so confusing, and it may just not be that helpful. But we'll just point out a few things. But in the Hanbali madhab, pillars, mandatory actions, and then sunan. Pillars, if you forget them or you intentionally omit or skip them, your salah is invalid. That's it, invalid. You have to repeat it. Mandatory actions, if you omit them, intentionally omit or skip them, your salah is also invalid in the Hanbali madhab. And we will do a little bit of comparative stuff here. But in the Hanbali madhab, the mandatory actions, which is basically the other takbirs after the first takbir, tasbih, subhana rabbiyal a'la, subhana rabbiyal azim, in ruku' and sujood, saying sami Allahu liman hamida and rabbana lakal hamd, saying rabbi ighfir li when you sit between the two sujoods, the first tashahhud, sitting for the first tashahhud, saying Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallayta ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid, Durud Sharif, Salat Ibrahimiyya. This is also wajib. Omitting any one of those intentionally invalidates your prayer in the Hanbali madhab, and if you omit it, if you forget it, then you can make up for it by sujood as-sahw, prostration of forgetfulness. This differentiates between the pillars and the mandatory actions, because for the pillars, if you forget them, there is no makeup for them. If you forget them and you're inside the prayer, you need to repeat that rak'ah. If you forgot ruku' and one rak'ah, you need to repeat that whole rak'ah. Go back, if you did not get to the ruku' of the next rak'ah, go back to that ruku' and start anew. And I repeat that rak'ah. So there is no makeup. You can't make sujood as-sahw because you forgot a pillar. You have to make up for that pillar. And then you make sujood as-sahw after you made up for that pillar. You made sujood as-sahw because you forgot. But for these, if you forget one of these, if you forget the first tashahhud, what does the Hanbali madhab prescribe for you in this case? If you forget the first tashahhud, don't worry about it. If you had already stood up for the third rak'ah, okay, carry on with your prayer. At the end of the prayer, make sujood as-sahw, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. The sunan, anything that is not the pillars and not the mandatory actions, doing this or anything, dua al-istiftah, anything that is a sunnah in the prayer, if you forget them or you omit them intentionally, your salah is still valid. So that's the sunan. is it prescribed for you to make sujood al-sahw if you forget them? In the Hanbali madhab, if you forget a verbal sunnah lafziyya, verbal one, it is recommended to make sujood al-sahw. If you forget sunnah fi'liyya, which is actual, which is some action that is recommended, then it is only permissible to make sujood al-sahw. So if you forgot to do this, they'll let you make sujood al-sahw. If you want to do it, they do it, but they don't recommend it for you. It's not recommended, it's just mubah, it's permissible if you want to do it. Anyway, so that is the distinction between pillars, mandatory actions, and sunan. Pillars, no makeup for them. You will have to pray the prostration of forgetfulness, not to make up for them, but just because you forgot. The only makeup for them is to make them, to repeat them. Mandatory actions, if you forget them, carry on, pray sujood al-sahw at the end, and you're fine. Sunan, you don't need anything. Your salah is valid, you don't need to worry about anything. If you want to pray sujood al-sahw at the end, go ahead. Okay, so Imam al-Qudamah started here by saying al-qiyam ma'al-qudra, standing if capable, standing if capable. And if he is not capable, not only, not capable in the sense that he cannot stand up, but if his doctor told him any particular act of worship will cause your condition to worsen or will cause your healing to be delayed, then that he's not capable, even though he's capable. Like I can still make it, but the doctor told me if you do this, if you sit like this in the tashahhud, your meniscus will not heal in your knee. Your whatever in your knee tear that you have in your knee will not heal. I could still sit, there is very slight pain or maybe even no pain, but the doctor said if you do this, it will not heal. Then you certainly have an excuse. You have an excuse. So standing if capable. And like we said, standing is on a pillar only in fard. Standing is not a pillar in sunnah. If you decide to pray your qiyamul layl sitting, the Prophet ﷺ did. And Aisha reported that the Prophet ﷺ would pray a long night prayer sitting. So yes, he was usually standing حتى تفطرت قدماه until his feet cracked, but sometimes he sat. And sitting is permissible whether or not you are tired, exhausted, sick. If you want to sit in your nafla prayer, you could sit. How much of the reward you get? Half of the reward of the one standing. This applies to whom? People who are able to stand but decided to sit. People who are unable to stand, how much of the reward do they get? Full. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا مَرِضَ الْعَبْدُ أَوْ سَافَرْ كُتِبَ لَهُ مَا كَانَ يَعْمَلُ صَحِيحًا مُقِيمًا. When the slave of Allah becomes sick or travels, he will get the reward of that which he used to do, sahihan muqiman, when he was healthy and at home. Okay, so standing for those who are able to stand is a pillar in the fard prayer unless they are incapable. On board of a flight, they are capable because they are, or a ship, and they can't stand, otherwise they'll fall off, or they are sick, or they are at war, or some reason that makes them incapable of standing in the fard prayer. The second is takbir, takbiratul ihram, the opening takbir. Takbiratul ihram is by consensus required. But keep in mind that the Hanafis consider this to be a prerequisite, not a pillar. It's a prerequisite like in niyyah. They add it to the niyyah. But a prerequisite, which is shart, is just like the rukn, but it's basically a disagreement in classification, not in meaning. Because a prerequisite is also required for the validation of the act of worship. It's just that they consider it takbirah not to be part of the salah. They consider the takbirah to be an induction into an initiation, induction into the salah, which will start after the takbirah. The same applies to them with the taslima. It basically ends the salah. It's not part of the salah. Anyway, just remember, the majority, by consensus it's required, the majority consider it a pillar, so standing in the first takbir. Keep in mind, Rafa al-Yadayn is not included in any of this. Rafa al-Yadayn is a sunnah. So if someone did not make Rafa al-Yadayn even in the first takbirah, his salah will be valid. So takbirah is just saying Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. But certainly we want to observe the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ. We want to make Rafa al-Yadayn. This is by agreement in the first takbirah. They disagree after this about the other takbirahs. So you make Rafa al-Yadayn in the first takbirah, but this is not a pillar. Only saying Allahu Akbar is a pillar. For those who do not speak Arabic, can they say Allahu Akbar in any other language? Okay, so for those who speak Arabic, you cannot say Allahu Akbar in any other language by consensus. For those who speak another language, then we have, look, the majority said that you cannot speak Allahu Akbar. Malikis, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis, they said that you cannot say Allahu Akbar in any language if you know Arabic. The Hanafis said people who are Persian or this or that, they can say Allahu Akbar in their own language, even if they know Arabic, even if they are able to say it in Arabic. Malikis, Shafi'is, Hanbalis said no, they can't. The bottom line is, none of the Hanafi scholars tells people nowadays to say Allahu Akbar in any language. So just, like move on. Allahu Akbar has to be said in Arabic. If you know Arabic, Allahu Akbar has to be said in Arabic.
Even non-Muslims know how to say Allahu Akbar.
But yeah, so everybody says Allahu Akbar now. And for different reasons. I heard from a brother, that they used to say it in their training in the Marine Corps. He was part of the Marine Corps. And he went to his, superior, and he said to him, I feel threatened. I feel that if I say Allahu Akbar, someone will shoot me. So, anyway. So Allahu Akbar in Arabic, but for people who are truly incapable of saying it in any other language, then it can be translated until they can say it in whichever language. They can be translated in whichever language they speak until they learn it in Arabic, according to the Shafi'is and Hanbalis. The Malikis said no translation. So that's takbir. And then Fatiha. And Fatiha, this is by agreement. By agreement has to be said in Arabic. By agreement has to be said in Arabic. Because we said that Imam Abu Hanifa disagreed first with his disciples over the possibility of translating Fatiha, and he allowed it to be translated. Then his two disciples, or his disciples, sort of convinced him, and he recanted his position. And then they came to an agreement at the end that Fatiha has to be said in Arabic. What if you cannot say Fatiha in Arabic? In the Hanbali Madhab, what do they prescribe for someone who cannot say Fatiha in Masjid? First of all, someone came to the Prophet ﷺ and said to him, I can't basically get down any part of the Quran or memorize any part of the Quran. Teach me what I could say. And the Prophet ﷺ said to him, say, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And then the Prophet ﷺ also in a hadith said, if you can't read any part of the Quran, فَاحْمَدِ اللَّهِ وَكَبِّرْهُ وَهَلِّلْهُ فَاحْمَدْهُ وَكَبِّرْهُ وَهَلِّلْهُ. Then praise Allah, glorify Him, and say La ilaha illallah. Praise Allah, say Alhamdulillah. Glorify Him, say Allahu Akbar. And say La ilaha illallah. So Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah Akbar. So in the Hanbali madhab, they say that if you cannot say al-Fatiha, can't say al-Fatiha, and you memorized part of the Quran that is equal to al-Fatiha, recite that, because it is Quran. The closest thing to al-Fatiha is Quran. Recite that Quran. And if you did not memorize any part of the Quran, but you were able to memorize one ayah of al-Fatiha, repeat it a number of times that will be equal to the length of the recitation of al-Fatiha. So you memorized Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. This is all you could do. You stand up and you say, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Alhamdulillah. A number of times that's equal to the recitation of al-Fatiha, or any part of al-Fatiha. Then if you cannot do this, then you say any dhikr, and they prescribe Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. They sort of merge the two hadith, and they take some of the dhikrs in the two hadith and prescribe Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. What if you cannot remember this? You could say one of them. Just pick Allahu Akbar. If you want to teach someone new how to pray, teach them Allahu Akbar. And then they could use it for takbirat al-tahrim, and they could use it in place of al-Fatiha. They just keep on saying Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar for the time of al-Fatiha, for the duration that the recitation of al-Fatiha takes. So that is basically the recitation of al-Fatiha for those who are unable to recite it. However, everybody is required to learn it. Everybody is required to learn it in Arabic. Can you recite it from a paper? Yes, you can recite it from a paper. You can recite it from a paper. Preferably, don't hold the paper. If you could keep it in front of you without holding it, it is preferable so that you're not busy. Can you hold the paper? Yes, you can hold the paper. And recite al-Fatiha from a paper. What if you memorize al-Fatiha? In fact, the Shafi'is and many Hanbalis said you still could hold a paper and recite the Quran in general. If there is an Imam in Salat, but no one is doing this anymore, and that is also something like just move on, But because this is a Shafi'i/Hanbali position, that in Salat al-Fard also, the Imam who does not memorize a good portion of the Quran, and so let's say that it's a community, they don't have like an Imam, and then they ask someone of them to lead, and every time in Salat al-Fajr someone is reciting Surah Qul Huwallahu Ahad, and people started to get bored. And they're demanding something like more. Can the Imam hold? He can recite al-Fatiha, he can recite Qul Huwallahu Ahad, the Salah is complete, but the people just want to listen to more Quran in Salat al-Fajr. Can he hold the paper and recite Quran from it? Shafi'is and Hanbalis said yes. So Shafi'is and many Hanbalis said yes. It's controversial in the Hanbali madhab, but Shafi'is and many Hanbalis said yes. But move on, don't do this. Please, certainly not here. But we're talking about a small community in a small place, a remote place, and their Imam, they're having some special circumstances. And this is when you tap into those controversial issues. But unless there are these special circumstances, you don't bring up controversial issues to stir controversy. Because then your heart is corrupted. You have a problem. If you're just wanting to show off the repository of information that it's full of controversial issues, you have a problem, a big problem. Okay, then bowing, and then rising from bowing. These are also pillars, bowing and then rising from bowing. Why is it that you find some Hanafis, not all Hanafis, are quick in rising, like they rise and they prostrate quickly? Because this is not tuma'nina in this part, or this is not a pillar for them. Rising from bowing is not a pillar from them. So if they actually went from ruku' to sujood, that works. That's valid. But none of them, because when the mashayikh teach people what that which is preferable. The mashayikh don't teach the people do that which is the bare minimum, the bare minimum. So most of the Hanafis would not even, know that you could actually do that. That would be valid. Because when they are taught in the masjid, when they are taught in the maktab, they are taught what? What is good, what is the complete, full, perfect way of praying. So most of the controversial issues are limited to classrooms, really. Whatever controversy that manifests eventually in the prayer hall is very limited, very limited. So bowing, rising from bowing, and then prostration and sitting between the two prostrations, so sitting after the prostration. And tranquility in all of this, because the Prophet ﷺ kept on saying to the musi' salata, to the one whose the prayer was defective, or the one who prayed improperly, the Prophet kept on telling him, ثُمَّ ارْفَعْ حَتَّى تَعْتَدِلَ قَائِمًا ثُمَّ اسْجُدْ حَتَّى تَطْمَئِنَّ سَاجِدًا ثُمَّ ارْفَعْ حَتَّى تَطْمَئِنَّ جَالِسًا. So he kept on telling him, and then rise until you're completely straight, and then prostrate until you have tuma'nina, that is stillness, tranquility, tuma'nina in your sujood. Then sit up until you have tuma'nina in your julus. So in the Hanbali madhab, tuma'nina in each one of these pillars is a pillar in and of itself. And the tuma'nina, they tell you, so tuma'nina in qiyam is the period that is required to recite al-Fatiha. That's tuma'nina in qiyam. Tuma'nina in ruku' and sujood is the period that is required to say Subhana Rabbiyal A'la once. Tuma'nina in julus, sitting between the two sajdas, is the period where you can say Rabbi ghfirli once. Okay? Because they say that every one of these pillars has a verbal action attached to them. It is when you make that verbal action once, that would be enough tuma'nina, or stillness, tranquility in this pillar. So that is what they mean by tranquility: stillness, calmness, not making haste in every pillar. However, this is basically the bare minimum. We're talking fiqh here. We're not talking about, zakah from the angle of tazkiyah or the angle of tasawwuf. We're talking about salah from the angle of fiqh. Tuma'nina, saying Subhana Rabbiyal Azim once and coming up, it's pretty quick. No one will advise you to do that. It's just that this is the bare minimum. So if you are being called to the emergency room, so like they're not the emergency room, because it probably, but if you have something really, really important that you have to tend to, and you must pray before you tend to it, knowing the bare minimum is good, because if you want to really do your prayer in time and then tend to that which is extremely important that you need to tend to, then that is where knowing the bare minimum is good. And that is when you stand up if you want to do the bare minimum salah in the Hanbali madhab. So I'll do the pillars for you, just the pillars stripped from anything else, and then one rak'ah, only pillars. So you would say Allahu Akbar. You don't have to raise your hands because it's not a pillar. So you'll say Allahu Akbar. You recite al-Fatiha, and then you go down, Subhana Rabbi. You don't even need to say that, but the duration that one tasbihah will take, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim once, this duration, and then you rise, and then you go down. And that is one rak'ah. That is complete. So basically, if someone has to attend to something that's really important, they can finish the 4 rak'ahs in somewhere around 60 seconds. Anyway, but these are the pillars, meaning the skeleton, the bare minimum. You want your salah to be robust and healthy, right? You want your salah to be healthy. You don't want your salah to come on the Day of Judgment emaciated. Yeah. Any disambiguation? Yes.
We spoke before about making up the prayers that people have for many years. Would it be advisable to, because it might become overwhelming, to do all those years? Would it be advisable to just do the bare minimum?
Yes, you could do the bare minimum if you want to make up the 200,000 prayers that you missed. Then it may be advisable to do the bare minimum, so that's not overwhelming. Yes.
There was a well-known Imam recently, he was giving a talk on Salah, and somebody asked him, because he was in a police academy, he didn't want to pray in front of the officers. So he said, it's okay, you can pray in your car. But then he's given up the rukn of standing. Are there any other madhab or any opinions that it's okay for him to do that in that case?
If it reaches a point of ikrah, compulsion, then it is. But if it doesn't reach the point of compulsion, no, embarrassment does not count. If it reaches the point of compulsion or fear, a sort of legitimate, justifiable fear or compulsion, then it is okay. And then it is okay also if, they say one of the things when it comes to standing is that you do not have to stand if you are in prison with a low ceiling. So you don't have to do the extra work basically to do this or this, or just sit down if there is a low ceiling. And they used to have those in the past, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us afiyah. If someone is claustrophobic and you get put in one of those cells, it's just a crazy thing. Yes?
If you pray like this, would you have to do the sah because you didn't do the mandatory? If you pray just with the pillars.
If you pray just with the pillars, okay. We will come to it. If you pray just with the pillars, it is invalid according to the Hanbalis because you omitted the mandatory actions willfully. But according to the majority, and another report in the Hanbali madhab, so we're saying here, pray with the pillars, no mandatory actions. If you omit all the mandatory actions, it will be according to small a, not capital A, plus H, M, S, capital H, capital M, capital S. So authorized Hanafi, authorized Maliki, authorized Shafi'i, and one report in the Hanbali madhab will validate your prayer. So I personally don't teach new Muslims the Hanbali way. I teach them according to this other report in the Hanbali madhab that will consider those mandatory actions preferable, not mandatory. Preferable, not mandatory. They are preferable in the other madhab. So what is considered the mandatory in the Hanbali, except some disagreement in the Shafi'i madhab over Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, but in general, the mandatory actions in the Hanbali madhab are preferable in all the other madhab. And that is also a report from Imam Ahmad or a report in the Hanbali madhab. So it's small a, yes, the authorized view in the Hanbali madhab, capital A, is that these mandatory actions, if you omit them, your prayer is invalid. But in the other report in the madhab, which is consistent with the majority of scholars, the 3 other madhab, these are preferable actions. If you omit them, they don't invalidate your prayers. A new Muslim is deserving of concessions or not? Ease, simplification, absolutely. So if you teach a new Muslim, you don't have to be hardcore Hanbalis, you don't have to teach him according to the authorized view in the madhab. could choose the other view in the madhab, which is consistent with the majority, and simplify things for him. Okay. And this is basically simplification without compromise, because they did not disagree over this after the Prophet made it, cut and dry and clear like the sun in the middle of a summer day. And had the Prophet made it clear, they would have not disagreed. So this is not basically compromise. This is facilitation. Okay. And then after tranquility, the last tashahhud is considered a pillar in the Hanbali madhab, and sitting for the last tashahhud is another pillar. And the first taslim, according to al-Umdat, the first taslim, according to the other books in the madhab and the authorized view of the madhab, it is both taslims, not the first one. But we said in the Hanbali madhab, the first taslim is said aloud, and the second taslim is quieter, just close to the Malikis. So the Hanbali here is very close to the Maliki. So the all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That's Hanbali. Malikis will be Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That's it. So now I have the mandatory actions. All the other takbirs in the salah are considered mandatory. So aside from the first takbirah, any other takbir is mandatory. So basically, according to this view, if you even don't make any takbirs, you go down to ruku', come up, go down to sujood, come up, say nothing all the time, you recited al-Fatiha and you made the first takbirah, you recited al-Fatiha, you made the first takbirah, and you will say the last tashahhud, and you will make the last taslim, and that is all you need to say in the salah. Because all the other, azkar are considered mandatory in the madhab. They're considered preferable according to the majority. So the other takbirs, which is all the takbirs between the movements, tasbih, which is say Subhana Rabbiyal Azim and Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, and we said that the mandatory tasbih is once. Perfect tasbih goes anywhere from 3 to 10. The lower end of perfection is 3, the highest end of perfection is 10 for the Imam. Highest end of perfection for al-Munfarid, the one who's praying alone, is what? No ceiling. But for the Imam, highest end of perfection is 10, because the Imam is also there are people behind you. So that is tasbih. Saying Sami Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana lakal hamd. Saying Sami Allahu liman hamida is mandatory on the Imam and the Munfarid. The Ma'mum will not say Sami Allahu liman hamida. The Ma'mum will say Rabbana lakal hamd only. Saying Rabbana lakal hamd is mandatory on the Imam, the Ma'mum, and the Munfarid, all three of them. Imam, Ma'mum, and the Munfarid. The Munfarid means the one who's praying alone by himself. Saying Rabbi ighfir li between the two sajdas. Some of you may be surprised that this is a mandatory thing. This is a Hanbali peculiarity. This is a Hanbali mufradat al-madhab. No other madhab considers this to be wajib at all, and many of you will be even surprised to see it here on this list. But Rabbi ighfir li between the two sajdas is mandatory in the Hanbali madhab. You have to say Rabbi ighfir li at least once. First tashahhud, the first tashahhud is, first tashahhud and sitting for the first tashahhud. The first tashahhud is the one after the second rak'ah in a tri-rak'ah or tetra-rak'ah prayer, whatever that means. So in a prayer that is more than 2 rak'ahs, the first tashahhud and sitting for it is mandatory. Like I said, all of this is preferable according to the majority. Saying Allahumma salli ala Muhammad salat Ibrahimiyya at the end of the prayer is also mandatory in the madhab. The other view in the madhab, which is considered authorized, is that it is sunnah. Or you could say both are A capital, A and A2. because the disagreement is intense over this being mandatory or sunnah. But according to the majority, Salat Ibrahimiyya is sunnah. It is not required. So these are the sunnah. These are the mandatory actions which are considered sunnah according to the majority. So after the pillars, the Imam al-Qudamah said, فَهَذِهِ الْأَرْكَانِ لَا تَتِمُّ الصَّلَاةُ إِلَّا بِهَا. Without these pillars, the prayer will not be fulfilled. Meaning, you can't make up for them by just prostration, you will have to redo them. And if you're outside of the prayer, you have to redo the entire prayer. Redo the rak'ah if you're inside the prayer, redo the entire prayer if you're outside the prayer. After the mandatory actions, Imam ibn Qudamah said, فَهَذِهِ إِن تَرَكَهَا عَمْدًا بَطَلَتْ صَلَاتُهُ وَإِن تَرَكَهَا سَهْوًا سَجَدَ لَهَا. If these acts are left out intentionally, the prayer is invalidated. If left out of forgetfulness, the praying person should pray the prostration of forgetfulness for it. So, as we said, وما عدا هذا فالسنن لا تبطل الصلاة بعمدها ولا يجب السهو أو لا يجب السجود لسهوها. Apart from these, the rest are preferable acts. The prayer is not invalidated by intentionally leaving them out, and the prostration of forgetfulness is not mandatory in the case of forgetting them. So, apart from the 12 and 7, these 19 are pillars and mandatory actions. Apart from these 19 actions and sayings, the rest of the actions in the prayer will be sunan that will not invalidate the prayers if left out. That's it for the wajibat, the arkan, the wajibat, and the sunan of the prayers. Like I said, when you are teaching new Muslims, please just keep it simple. So if you omit, and some of them are extremely smart, and they can even memorize things faster than you. So for those who are extremely smart, don't be rigid. If they want to learn more, teach them more. But for your ordinary folk, just keep it simple. Teach them how to pray by only giving them the pillars. And when it comes to the pillars, the Hanbali madhab is the most robust with pillars. So if you go by these pillars, you will be covered. You will be covered very well. Just these 12 acts. And like I said, like you guys suggested, if someone has many prayers to make up, he could use the bare minimum to make up for them. If someone is in a real hurry to attend something really important, he can use the bare minimum to finish his prayer and tend to what he needs to tend to.